y'all. So today I want to talk to you guys about how to get sharp images. If you guys are anything like me, sharp images are super important to me, and it's something that in the beginning of my photography career, I feel like I just couldn't get. I just couldn't figure out how to get these sharp, intact pictures when your subjects are moving. So it's something that I have researched, I've talked to other photographers about, I've YouTubed everything, and I feel like these 5 things have helped me so much when you're trying to capture moving subjects and you want to make sure that they're in focus. So the first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is back button focus. So if you have never heard of back button focus before, this is going to be a game changer for you. I swear, when a photographer mentioned it to me and I changed it on my Canon Rebel T3i, which is what I started with, it was a game changer. I remember the first picture I took of my son Noah. He was in a high chair and he looked over at me while he was painting, and you guys know toddlers, they're looking at you for a split second. I remember grabbing my camera and I took the picture, and it was so sharp. And I was like, this is amazing. I was like, why has this been all my life? So I'm going to encourage you, if you don't do back button focus, at least try it. If it doesn't work for you, then that's fine. But it was a game changer for me. So I shoot now with a Canon 6D Mark II. And back button focus, if you guys have no idea, I'm going to explain it real quick to you. There's a lot of different videos and stuff out there that will go a little bit more in depth of how to set it up for your camera. But what back button focus is normally when you have your camera, you have your shutter button right here, and you're pushing it down halfway in order to focus, and then pushing down fully in order to capture the image, right? So back button focus, what it does is it takes your focus button and moves it to the back of the camera. So I actually have my back button focus set for AF on and the star button. The reason why I do 2 buttons is because if you're holding a button down continuously, the button wears out a little bit quicker. So I try really hard to switch back and forth between the 2 buttons because I don't want the button to wear down. So I'm going to be holding down that button instead of pushing my shutter halfway. So I'm continually holding down this button and then snap, snap, snap. What it's telling my camera is to continually be looking to refocus. So instead of focusing one time and then snapping a picture, my camera is continually focusing on that one spot that I've told it to focus on. So if we're going to take moving subjects, for example, if I'm having the children that I'm photographing run towards me, okay, and I have that spot on them and I'm using back button focus, and I'm continually pushing down this button to tell my camera to keep refocusing on that one spot that I've picked, as they're running towards me, my camera is going to constantly be refocusing because they're out of my focal plane if they're running towards me, right? So as they're running towards me, I'm holding down my back button focus and I am snap, snap, snapping, so that way they're continually in focus as they're running towards me. So back button focus, again, huge game changer. Please let me know if it works for you. A lot of people don't know that you have to hold down the button. Yes, hold down that button as you're taking pictures. The second thing is that I keep my camera on single point autofocus. So what this does is it tells your camera that I just want to focus on this one spot. I don't want to focus on a big group, because if a big group starts moving around or something, then what happens is your camera gets a little confused on where to make the focus. You want to make sure you're telling your camera exactly what to do all the time. You don't want anything to be up to the camera except for white balance sometimes if you're not using Kelvin or anything. There's very, very few things that you want your camera to make the decision for you. You are the professional. You want to tell your camera what to do. So single point autofocus, single point AF just allows you to choose which spot you want to be in focus. I will go later with a tip on where I focus, typically with that spot, but that's the second thing I want you guys to do is change your camera setting if it's not already on single point autofocus, or AF, single point AF. The third thing that I want you guys to change in your camera is if you are using Canon, it is AI Servo. I do believe it's AFC for Nikon. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I am not perfect. I am wrong a lot, especially when it comes to Nikon stuff. I've never shot with Nikon, so but I do believe it's AFC or something like that with Nikon, but it is AI Servo with Canon. I want you to change the setting because it's going to allow your camera to continuously be refocusing because you're telling your camera that, hey, I'm going to be shooting moving subjects. So I want you guys to make sure that you have your camera in this mode, so that way you're going to be able to continually be refocusing, and again, telling your camera that you are shooting something that is moving and it needs to keep up. So after you've changed all of those settings, okay, now your camera is set up to shoot for moving subjects. And I always do this because it's like, these are prime examples of moving subjects. So the first thing that I want to tell you guys about is settings. So what are my maximum and minimum for my settings? I'm not going to go into what aperture, ISO, and shutter speed are, just because I feel like that's a whole different video, and I definitely can do something like that. But for this purposes right here, I'm just going to tell you guys what my minimum or maximum amount is and why I do it the way I do in order to get moving subjects. So the first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is shutter speed. So shutter speed, real quick, if you don't know, is how fast your shutter is going up and down, okay? So the longer your shutter is open, the more chance that you have for blur, especially with moving subjects. So what we want is that shutter speed to be as fast as possible, okay? So, but with that is, when your shutter is open, it's allowing light in. So if we have it too fast, then what's happening is our camera doesn't have enough light to be able to capture the image. But if it's moving too slow, you're going to have a lot of blur and you're not going to have sharp in focus images. So my rule of thumb is I do not go below 1/320th of a second for my shutter speed. I don't go any slower than that. I know a lot of photographers will tell you that you can go slower, and you might have a really steady hand, and you might be able to do it. But me personally, it's just a rule of thumb when I am taking pictures of moving subjects, especially of little kids who are like, they're so quick to move, like you got to capture their smile real quick and everything. That is just my rule of thumb. The higher that I can go on my shutter speed is better, but that's the lowest I'll go, especially as like lights going down and everything. ISO, I typically will pick just based on how much lighting I do. I don't have a minimum and maximum for my ISO, but I do have a tip for aperture. So I know when you get your lens, especially if you pay that money to have like a 1.2, which is what I have, I have a 50 millimeter 1.2. I understand the drive and the desire to get that creamy background and everything with that low aperture, because what you're doing is shooting wide open and you're just, giving a very small focal plane, so everything in the background is very like fuzzy and blurred, and it's just really pretty. It's gorgeous. I'm not gonna lie, it's absolutely gorgeous. But the problem with going that low is you're giving your camera and you're telling it is just such a small focal spot. So if your subject goes out of that focal range, what happens is they're going to be blurred and they're just going to be a little bit out of focus. So if you're thinking about like a family that's lined up, if the little kid all of a sudden moves forward a little bit, all of a sudden they're out of that focal range. So if you're going all the way down to even like 1.8, they're out of it just a little bit. So they're going to be a little bit softer than the parents are, or wherever you have your focus spot on. So rule of thumb for me is when I'm shooting kids under the age of 5, I do not go below 3.2. It's just my rule. Sometimes I'll break that rule, just depending, especially if it's just a picture of them or them and their siblings. Sometimes I'll dip below, but rule of thumb of me is I don't go below 3.2. I definitely, with any children, don't go below 2.8. It's just a huge thing for me. I try really hard not to. Now, if it is like, mom and dad, of course I'll go below because they're going to be less likely to move. But when it's children and they're moving and you're trying to capture like, dad throwing up the baby or something, or if you're trying to capture, kids jumping or playing or interacting or Ring Around Rosie or anything along those lines, you're going to need a bigger aperture. And a more narrow aperture, so a higher aperture number. That's just my rule of thumb. If it works for you, that's awesome. If it doesn't, then, I would try even going higher, honestly. But I started with having my aperture at 4.0, and I started slowly going down, just because, like, for me personally, it was very important to have sharp images, and it's something that you just have to learn how to do at a lower aperture. And I'm not saying that it's not possible. Like my son now, he's 9 and he knows to stand still or like move slower. So I can dip really low with my aperture with him. But when it comes to other children, like, you know, I would much rather have like a higher aperture and be able to have everything in focus than a lower aperture and have like out of focus images. So start with the higher aperture and then start slowly going down and find out where your sweet spot is. The last tip that I have for you guys, and this I think is so important, a lot of photographers tell you to keep your spot or your single point focus on an eye, right? And that's a great way to do it, especially when you're photographing adults or you're doing headshots or anything. You want to make sure the eyes are the sharpest because that is where everyone's eyes go towards. But when you're shooting a family, okay, what happens, especially when they're moving, if you put a spot, like let's just put my finger and like say like this is the spot, it's a lot easier for me to move out of that focus spot, okay? Especially if I'm turning my head or moving real quick or anything along those lines. So what I do is I put the focus point right here and I put it on the person who's in the center. So the reason why I do that is because it is a lot harder to lose this focus point than it is on the eye. Now, if I'm doing headshots or if I'm just doing single shots of a child, of course I'm going to put it on the eye. But I'm talking about when we're moving, when we're running, when we're jumping, when we're doing something. I'm putting the focus point right here to make sure that my subjects are in focus. So if I put my focus right here between that and having my aperture at 3.2 where I need it, everything's going to be in focus. And that's just, you know, something that, again, is super important to me. So these are my 5 tips. If you found them helpful, please leave a comment, let me know. And if you want any more tips and tricks, I do have a Facebook education group that is linked below, and I have a couple freebies for you guys as well. So make sure you click those links, check us out, and if you come to my Facebook group, let me know, say hi, tell me where you found me and everything, and introduce yourself. I love getting to know all of my students in there, and you know, we have such a great community. So definitely check that out, and I will see you guys next time.